In China, you just disappear if they don't like you. Be careful what you wish for, because everyone's watching this show, and if you get something wrong tonight, maybe you disappear.
It's not common that we see a representative of the Chinese state sitting down with a Western journalist for a lengthy and robust grilling. So it was good to see this episode of Head to Head on Al Jazeera with the journalist Mehdi Hasan interviewing Victor Gao. It's out on YouTube and I see it's had a lot of views already. In this video, I'll talk about what I think was really positive about this program. And then I'll offer one constructive criticism. I was actually in the live audience for this show when it was filmed. There's me laughing at something funny, which Victor Gao has just said. He was making fun of the British government in a way that was entirely justified. The show has a panel of 3 experts who chip in and give their views on the discussion, and the producers of the show had interviewed me to be possibly one of them. I was very happy to be considered, but slightly mortified when they went with this guy instead of me. That's Martin Jakes, and if you're a regular viewer of this channel, you might already know that I'm not really a fan of his work. I have another video on this channel about him, which you may want to take a look at after this one if you've not seen it already. Now let's talk about Victor Gao. He's vice president of a high-profile think tank in China called the Center for China and Globalization. He's become quite well known on international media circuits for standing up very strongly for the position of the Chinese state. Because of who he is, this was never going to be a free discussion and exchange of ideas. Not that you'd get that with many politicians, to be fair. But the discussion could be quite frustrating to watch. Someone else in the audience said to me afterwards that it was a bit like watching 2 brick walls talking to each other. But on the positive side, good for Gao for agreeing to do these confrontational interviews, because there are very few people in Chinese elite circles who will do this, and it did draw public attention to a lot of the problems going on in China at the moment. Also good for Mehdi Hasan as well. As a journalist, he's very much on the political left. Quite a lot of commentators who would consider themselves to be on the political left in the US and the UK shy away from being really critical of China. That could be for a number of reasons. For some of them, I think they see in China some kind of genuine hope for a socialist future and they want to defend that. And for some of them, I think they're so critical of their own liberal democratic governments and some of the awful things that they do, such as perpetuate lots of wars overseas, that they feel hypocritical criticising China. And I think there's some fear as well from some on the left of playing into some of the right-wing Cold War rhetoric that's around at the moment, where China gets demonized as a deliberate strategy to valorize liberal democracies, really as a way of whitewashing some of the awful things that they're doing themselves. None of that is applying to Mehdi Hasan here. He already has a very strong record of being critical of the United States government. And it's good to see him here applying the same standards to China as well. In particular, it's good to see him taking on the issue of Xinjiang and the Uyghurs. Here's what he had to say.
Let's talk human rights, Victor. You've called Uyghurs in China's Xinjiang province your brothers and sisters. How do you feel about the fact that at least 500,000, some say more, of your brothers and sisters are being detained in camps by the Chinese government? That's 5% of the adult Uyghur population, one of the highest imprisonment detention rates in the world.
To give some background here, from 2017 onwards in China's northwestern region, security agents began putting hundreds of thousands of Uyghurs and other Muslim peoples into internment camps. This was presented as a counter-terrorism measure, but in fact it was carried out to such an extreme extent that any slight signs of religious practice or even associating with people involved in religious practice could lead to detention. This meant that lots of people were detained who had done nothing wrong. According to the anthropologist Darren Byler, who's studied the region for many years and interviewed many of the former detainees, reasons people were detained included joining a WeChat discussion group on the Quran, using a VPN, growing a beard, or giving up smoking. One of the invited guests, Rayhan Assad, is a human rights lawyer of Uyghur heritage herself. Here she talks about her brother, who has been detained for 8 years.
My brother Akbar Assad is a prominent tech entrepreneur. In fact, your own media outlet called him a bright star in the tech world. Right before his detention, he was invited on a state gala dinner, and then he disappeared. How could you explain that?
In China, we have about 20 Muslim ethnic groups. You need to ask one question. Why the extremism existed mostly among the Uyghur communities? Because there are extremists among the Uyghur community who want to separate Xinjiang away from China.
Has your brother been convicted of any crime?
Supported by CIA and other Western organizations.
CIA. Okay. Rayhan,
that's the real truth.
Hold on.
Talk to the Kazakhs, they don't support.
Has your brother been
Xinjiang
convicted of a
separatism.
crime?
According to UN, there's no trial has taken place. He just forcibly disappeared. Actually, it amounts to enforced disappearance. But according to the Chinese government, he committed a crime of inciting ethnic discrimination while he is systematically oppressed. And when I challenged that decision, because under the Chinese law, if you're committed with the alleged crime, that you have 3 years sentence, but he got 15 years. How do you justify that? Then they switched the crime.
Hasan also highlighted that there have been very credible reports of inhumane treatment in the camps by multiple sources, including the United Nations.
Victor, they're being tortured. Numerous testimonies the UN has collected. Are you okay with that?
Mehdi, when you talk about torture, think about Guantanamo Bay prisons.
Oh my word.
Rather than in Xinjiang. Xinjiang is a place of great peace and stability.
The accounts
Victor,
the accounts of detainees include being beaten with batons, electric batons, while strapped in a so-called tiger chair, being subjected to interrogation with water poured on their faces, prolonged solitary confinement, forced to sit motionless on stools for long periods like this. You're okay with this?
It's good to see this being highlighted by someone like Hasan, because there have been a lot of denials about what's happened to the Uyghurs in the region. I know there are a lot of very misleading videos on YouTube as well, claiming that everything is fine. A common way of denying what's been happening there is to say that this is a story put out by people who are really working for the United States government in one form or another, and they're trying to discredit China. But when someone like Hasan does it, because he has such a strong record of criticizing the United States government himself, it's difficult to make that kind of mud stick. Having said that, I do have one constructive criticism of the interview, and that was here.
There's no division or debate within the Chinese Communist Party.
Hasan here is wanting to make a serious point about the excessive concentration of power in Xi Jinping and the lack of democratic mechanisms in China. And that's fair enough. But to say there's no division or debate within the Chinese Communist Party isn't right. This perpetuates a stereotype about China. We often see in the press that all power and decisions come from Xi Jinping from the top down, but that's just not how governance works in China. Absolutely, there are certain things you can't say. You can't directly criticize the leadership, and you can't call for the downfall of the Communist Party without facing very serious repercussions. The scope for open discussion has certainly narrowed a lot under Xi Jinping. And there are certain flagship policies associated with Xi himself where debate does seem to be extremely difficult, and that seems to have been the case with the COVID policies. But to say there's no debate or division isn't really accurate. There are all kinds of disagreements and power struggles going on between the central and the local governments and between different government bureaucracies. This is something I've talked about quite a lot on this channel in other videos. Because in fact, a lot of the misunderstandings about China in the West come from not really understanding how the governance system in China works. And in fact, mostly it's what I study. I study the debates and the disagreements in policy circles about rural land reform and urbanisation, and both of these are hugely contested areas where there's a lot of debate and disagreement. Thank you for watching.